Hello, it's me, J-I-U-T, him, and this is another quick video where I'm going to go over a simple concept in Dungeons and Dragons. I've been asked a couple of times, hey Jay, I hear you run pretty exciting combats. How do you do that? What goes into making a great combat? And so I thought I could present a couple of really quick tips, just three tips, to make D&D combat really good every time. I mean, the first thing I would advise people is to not worry too much. D&D combat is fun. I don't really care what anybody says about that. D&D combat is fun. It's fun to play. You get a bunch of cool class abilities, you level up, you get new abilities, players want to use their abilities, and so we end up having fun, and that's great. So a lot of times, D&D combat, even this combat, which I designed to be the worst possible combat, I think is actually probably going to be kind of fun for some groups. But there are a couple of things, if you're running into this sort of issue of combat being repetitive or not as exciting as you want it to be, or you want to take up the stakes a little bit, there are some tips here. So this is my example of the worst possible combat. Just you and the bad guy in a large empty room where your heroes are just going to rush up, get into melee, and then duke it out until the numbers hit 0. That's, to me, that's probably the worst case scenario for a combat. So let's take a look at a slightly more robust combat. Now, I didn't want to use any maps online because I don't want to steal somebody's content without permission, put it in a video. So I made this by hand, so please be gentle, but here's some basic things that can make your combat a little more exciting. First of all, immediately you can see that there's terrain, and I think that terrain is extremely important for making interesting combats. Each of these brown lines represents a 10-foot increase in height. If you really wanted to make the terrain super matter, you might make those 20-foot increments. So now it takes more than one round to climb up onto the ledge. That could make moving around very tricky. And it also gives these archers a huge advantage early in the combat, as they can just kind of move out, take a shot, and then run behind cover. Now your players are thinking about where they're standing. Are we out in the open? Do we need to get cover? How can we create cover? There's a bit of a no man's land here in the middle where there's not a lot of cover. Maybe the players will get creative and use spells and other magical effects to create cover. You've also got these powerful barbarian type enemies who can sort of move in and block off the bridge. Now your monk character is going to be able to use their jumping ability to the full effect to leap across and get behind enemy lines. So that's kind of exciting. It's making those class features more impressive. So terrain is number one. Number two is enemy variety. So we've already started pointing out how enemy variety can impact and make a battlefield more exciting. Having these two really buff characters up front to block the bridge, that's interesting. Having the archers in the back to duck out, take shots, and then go back into cover, that's interesting. Having spellcasters up on the high mountain, again, it's interesting. It's creating different problems, and your players are going to want to solve them in different orders, and they'll change their battle strategy. It just gives them something to think about as they're engaging in the combat. What does this enemy type do? What's the highest priority enemy type? How do I deal with it in the most efficient and effective way possible? And then the third and final thing that I think is really important for making an interesting and engaging combat is alternative combat objectives. I put here a young child and a civilian character who have been captured. So imagine that the heroes, they manage to close the gap. They defeat both of these grunts up front. They manage to take out the archers in the back. And now the spellcasters on the hill and this other monks on the hill. And they're fighting these wizards. And suddenly the wizard's like, don't take another step towards me or I'll kill this child and his father. That creates drama, it creates tension, it creates excitement, it brings the stakes of the battle back. At this point in the battle, it seems like a foregone conclusion that the heroes will win. Most of the enemies are down, but we can reinvigorate that combat, add in drama and tension again by raising the stakes and threatening these civilians. And an alternative objective doesn't have to be civilians in danger. An alternative objective could be like having a central boss enemy, and once you defeat them, all the other enemies run away. And that means you can throw a huge number of enemies at the players that they definitely couldn't fight in a one-on-one fight, but once they take out the boss, all the other enemies either run away, or maybe it's like a bunch of robots and they all deactivate, something like that. It really ups the stakes at the beginning and then ends the combat when the exciting part is over. I think that a lot of time when people say D&D combat is boring, I might ask them, well, when the fight is obviously over, do you just end the fight? And this is not me saying, like, don't track enemy HP, ha ha ha. I don't do that. That's not me. I'm a tactical combat lover. But when a combat is over, the enemies know it too, and they will surrender, or run away, or teleport, or do something to survive, right? They're smart. And that also lets you end a combat that's no longer fun. And heck, even in a situation where you've taken down the boss, you've managed to defeat him, there's one little grunt enemy left on the map. Like, do we really want to do 3 rounds of combat as everybody says, well, the guy's way over there and I can't really get him and he's going to get him on his next turn, so I pass my turn until we get to that person and they take it out? Or can we just say, like, oh, you're next to the enemy, you can go ahead and finish off this last little grunt, that's fine. Like, again, I'm not saying don't track HP, and that's not always going to be the right choice. So if you're doing like a multi-encounter day or like a dungeon crawl, every single fight matters because it's all about how many resources you're using, and HP is a resource. But if it's a single encounter day, the drama of the fight is over, there's one enemy straggler left, he's not even that cool of an enemy, he's not the big boss, we've already taken out the big boss, at that point, you can just kind of wrap it up. I think that, like, we're not here to simulate every single second of everything that happens. We're here to simulate the exciting parts of an adventure. And so I think, like, take that as a 4th free bonus tip. Don't drag out a combat longer than necessary. But I think those 3 things: terrain, create an interesting terrain element, a river of lava on the battlefield, a battle on a bridge with a huge drop, a battle on the side of a mountain with a huge drop, a battle in the middle of the ocean on a rocking rowboat in the middle of a storm. The terrain can become a super dramatic part of the conflict, and it allows you to ratchet up the stakes when you want to. Having a fight in a burning building, and every turn on initiative 20, the fire spreads around you, and oh my god, my escape's about to be cut off. Do I finish off this enemy, or do I try to get out now? These kinds of exciting decisions make your turn more interesting. Number 2, vary the enemy types. One thing I love to do, get an enemy that's immune to fire and pair it up with a flame skull. Flame skulls can cast fireball, and then an enemy that's immune to fire is immune to fire. So you can just be lobbing fireballs down the hallway while the heroes are like, and flame skulls are not that high level. They only have 1 fireball, but 1 fireball 2 or 3 times is going to make a party at any level really frustrated, and they're going to start chasing down those flame skulls before they can get that fireball off, or counterspelling the flame skulls, expending a valuable resource, etc., etc., etc. So I vary up the enemy types. And then finally, alternate objectives. An objective that doesn't necessarily require you to kill every single bad guy on the map, but that keeps the dramatic stakes very high the entire time. Put a time limit on the battle. Put a location that all the players have to reach before it's too late, and then have enemies like knock them down or pull them back or slow them down in some way. All these things, these 3 things, can make a standard, boring encounter into an exciting, fun, engaging encounter. And, you may not use all 3 every time. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't use all 3 every time. But really focusing on one of them will improve your combat. Thinking about all 3 of them will improve all of your combats. And I stand by that advice. I hope that helps. I hope that helps you run a more exciting combat. If you use the advice, let me know down in the comments below. I really would be excited to hear that. If you like my videos, I really highly recommend you check out History Tours. I'm working really hard on it. I know that the audio on the 2nd episode is pretty quiet, but if you can tolerate that, I promise that I've done some work on the audio on the other episodes to make them a little more listenable. But yeah, I really think History Tours is one of the better things I've worked on, so check it out. Thanks so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.